Okay. All right. This period where people started thinking for themselves, challenging authority, and simply not doing things anymore because they were told to do it. They only did things that worked. They started trying new ways of doing things to make life better. It wasn't just happening in agriculture. It wasn't happening just in industry. It was happening in pure, everyday, intellectual discussion. It led to a revolution in science, which is the first thing I'm going to talk to, where all of a sudden intellectual freedom was now demanded, and scientists started publishing the results of their findings regardless of the punishment, because the belief was the only purpose to be on Earth as a scientist, as an intellectual critical thinker, is to improve the way we live our lives. And we should not be afraid of church or government punishment. The scientific revolution then leads to the Enlightenment, where intellectual freedom purely in the realm of science gives rise to intellectual freedom in everything else. Politics, religion, culture, everything. Everybody everywhere now asks all the difficult questions because the goal is to improve life on Earth. So how does it all... Wait, I've already done all this. It all starts with this guy, Nicholas Copernicus, a Polish astronomer. This is the guy that gave birth to all the radical thinking that I talked about a moment ago. Now look at him. He doesn't look like a revolutionary. He's actually got his hands together as if he's in the midst of prayer. But this was the first guy that said maybe church and non-religious things need to have two different distinct categories. Maybe the church isn't right about everything. For instance, in the realm of science. Astronomy was the first field of science where people started coming forward and saying, what we've done in the past, what has been taught in schools, what has been approved by kings and churches, it's just not working, and I can't keep it to myself anymore, because it's just a lie. Go.
I thought that people who thought like this were actually killed because it was, they were considered crazy or either.
Let me get to that. Yes, they were. They were. Anybody
before John Locke.
This is about 100 years. Wait. This is about 60 years before John Locke.
Yeah.
But remember, John Locke is in England, where the belief is that there should be a separation. There should be checks and balances, that the people have certain rights that cannot be taken away, the English Bill of Rights. That isn't a culture in France, or in Poland, or Russia yet, but it will be. Once it becomes common in England, it becomes accepted during the Enlightenment throughout Europe and as throughout the world. So, astronomy is the first place where scientists insisted on having the intellectual freedom to say and do what they wanted, as long as you could base it on facts. And remember, even in science, a fact is a fact only when other scientists can prove it independently. One scientist saying that's how that works is just a guide. You publish it, everybody tests the theory, and that's when it becomes a scientific law that is undeniable. So, at the time that Copernicus was doing his work as an astronomer, looking up into the heavens and determining the relationship between the planets and the stars, the accepted system of understanding the universe was the Ptolemaic system. It went all the way back to ancient Greece. It went back to ancient Greece, and it went back to the work of the mathematical astronomy of Ptolemy, who published his theories in 150 years AD after the birth of Christ. But his ideas were based on the even older ideas of Aristotle, a Greek philosopher from 300 years BC, or before the birth of Christ. So, what's my point? It's very simple. In the early 1500s, the theories, the laws, the way one interpreted the movements of the planets and the stars were based on thinking that we're now 1,800 years old. They were doing the same thing for 1,800 years. Now you might say, no one came up with a better idea, no one challenged this way of thinking about the relationship between the sun, the moon, the sun, the stars, whatever? No. Why? Because at a certain point, the Christian church accepted the Ptolemaic system as a reasonable explanation for the relationship between the earth, the moon, the sun, the stars, etc. Why? The Ptolemaic system argued that the earth was the center of the universe. This was mathematically incorrect, but nobody until Copernicus discovered that. All the people before who had an inkling that maybe that was wrong wouldn't say so out loud. Why? You get punished. Because the church and its political allies accepted this view of education, which was taught in the universities. Well, why did they care about how you interpret the relationship of the earth to the sun? Because in the Catholic Church, humans are God's ultimate creation. Adam was created in God's own image, Adam the first man. So it made sense that if God created Adam and Eve and put them on earth, that earth should be in the center of the universe, the center of God's whole creation. It just made sense. But if the earth is not the center of the universe, well then, what else is the church wrong about? And so other scientists said, I have a suspicion, but I'm not saying anything. Because in the early 1500s, this is when Martin Luther was breaking the Protestant or the Lutheran Church away from the Catholic Church, and there was the beginnings of religious violence between Protestants and Catholics. And Copernicus, a good Catholic Polish astronomer, had no interest in going against publicly his pope. But he was a scientist and he couldn't keep it to himself. So he published his work near the end of his life, and conveniently he just naturally died the year his book came out.
That's convenient.
Yeah. But, and his argument was that the earth is not the center of the universe, the sun is. That's what makes mathematical sense. Then came this guy, Galileo Galilei, an Italian. Now Galileo took Copernicus's ideas, and he wasn't living in far-off Poland, he was living in Italy, just a few miles away from the Vatican where the Pope was living. The Pope, who was desperately trying to hold together Christians as they were breaking apart Protestants from Catholics. Galileo read Copernicus, and he basically said, well, Copernicus is right. I don't care what the punishment is. He's right, and I'm running with this. So Galileo, through the use of the telescope he designed, proved that Copernicus's theories that the sun is at the center of the universe, not the earth, he proved it. He said, look through the telescope. See for yourself. I'm not making it up. And he wrote it down, he published it, and he got in trouble. He got in trouble because he openly defied the Pope and his version of science at a time when the Pope was desperately trying to convince people to listen to him on all things, religion, science, government, whatever. Remember, when Galileo published his work in the 1630s, all of Northern Europe had abandoned the Catholic Church. Kings had abandoned the Catholic Church. The Pope was desperately trying to hold on to his once vast authority over all Christians. And now comes a guy who lives just a few hundred miles away saying, and by the way, not only you're wrong about something else. Luther was saying the Pope is wrong about religion. Galileo is now saying the Pope is wrong about astronomy. It was a tough time to call the Pope out on stuff. So he got in trouble. He was put under house arrest. He was condemned, put under house arrest, and he was told, you either publicly recant and say I was wrong, or you're dead. All right? Well, Galileo did recant. He said, okay, I was wrong. Why did he did so? Was he a coward? Maybe. But Galileo also knew that once the work is published, it's out there for everyone. It doesn't matter what Galileo says. The ideas are in the book. Everybody else can read it. And then they'll determine if it's right or wrong. Now, the other thing that Galileo did, which caused even more trouble, is that he went even further and he says, you know, it isn't just the universe which you can determine its workings through trial and error and scientific discovery. There's more. I suspect, he said, that there are mathematical laws that determine the workings of every aspect of nature. Everything. Sun, moon, stars, trees, planets, weather, everything has got pure mathematical, scientific laws, and we just, as humans, need to figure out how they work. Galileo was saying in the early 1600s that humans have the intellectual capacity to understand the workings of God's own creation. All they got to do is put their mind to it and be given the intellectual freedom to allow their experimentation to take them where it takes them. He was given a whole lot of help by this guy, an Englishman, Francis Bacon. Bacon took all the experimentation going on in the 1500s and the 1600s, and he said, you shouldn't just test everything in astronomy. You should test everything everywhere. Everything has to be tested. If you just simply do things because we've always done them the way we've always done them, what if you're wrong? Then you're just reproducing error and suffering. Test everything. If it doesn't work, throw it out, regardless of the consequences. Now, this idea that humans have the right to test everything, question everything, is pretty revolutionary. 1627. This is when the Stuart kings were trying to be absolute monarchs. This is just before Louis XIV established successful absolutism. And here comes Francis Bacon saying, question everything. Now, it's not a coincidence that Bacon is from England, where you have the king balanced by Parliament. Parliament challenges the king. There's already a culture of challenge. Bacon would have more trouble making this argument if he lived in the France of Louis XIV. He would probably be killed. But in England, there is that culture of questioning, which eventually leads to the Glorious Revolution. But then this guy, Isaac Newton, pretty much destroys the church's authority over science. Because Copernicus said, I think the church might be wrong about the relationship of the sun, the earth, and the universe. Galileo proved it, but then he took it a step further and he says, I think there are mathematical laws that explain the workings of all nature. Isaac Newton proved Galileo to be correct. Newton, also another Englishman, also part of a culture of greater intellectual freedom to question things. Isaac Newton, in 1687, proved the theory of gravity. He proved that there is a mathematical way of determining, measuring, and predicting the relationship of the sun to the moon, the sun to the earth to its stars, etc. It's not magic. It's not only something God knows. It is a mathematical equation which humans can learn and use to further explore the cosmos. This is revolutionary. Galileo posited that humans can determine how God makes things work. None of these guys are challenging the existence of God. They're just challenging the idea that humans will never know how this stuff works. But Newton just showed in 1687, this is how gravity works. Well, if humans can figure out the workings of gravity, nature, well, everything else is easy. The late 1600s, when all of this is happening, is the same period that the agricultural revolution is starting to pick up, where people are doing trial and error to see how to grow more food out of the same plot of land, which leads to the industrial revolution. How do you make products faster, more efficiently, and cheaper? You see how it's all coming together? Everybody is challenging the old way of doing things, not just in politics and the economy, even in just science, biology, basic systems of thinking. And then we get this guy, John Locke, another Englishman. Not a coincidence, in a culture of, what the hell is that? Oh, in a culture of open dissent, of challenging the old way of doing things, you get this guy, John Locke. John Locke is the bridge from the scientific revolution to the Enlightenment. In the scientific revolution, scientists challenged the old ways of doing things. The Enlightenment, intellectuals, philosophers, challenged the old way of doing everything. In law, criminal justice, politics, religion, everything was challenged in order to make it better. John Locke he took critical thinking and brought it to the world of philosophy. People like Copernicus, Galileo, Newton, they all said, Bacon, if the scientific theory doesn't actually work, throw it out and keep looking until you find something that works. Locke said, if a way of thinking, philosophy, doesn't work, throw it out and find something that works. Trial and error. The goal is not to keep doing what you used to do, but to find the best way of doing something, regardless of who gets upset in the meantime. So, this guy's idea, John Locke, it's not a coincidence that he published his work during the Glorious Revolution when Parliament and its supporters overthrew the king, because they refused to believe that his system of absolute government was the right way to go. They refused to believe that enforcing religious faith was the right way to go. So at a time when authority was challenged in England, Locke was coming out and saying individuals have a right to choose their own churches, their own governments, and they have a right to leave those things if they don't work. So, one of the early things that he wrote was an essay concerning human understanding in 1690, just 2 years after the Glorious Revolution, which was revolutionary. Why? Because it posited against predominantly believed Catholic faith that you are not born with original sin. Now, for those of you that are not Catholic, let me explain this. Catholics believe that God created Adam and Eve, he put them in the Garden of Eden and gave them everything. But told them, don't do one thing. Do not eat from the fruit of the tree of wisdom. But the devil was there in the form of a snake, tempted Eve. She did the one thing that God told her not to do. She also tempted Adam to eat from this apple. God was upset, cast them out of the Garden of Eden, and put original sin on all of their offspring, their children. You follow?
Yeah.
And the way to remove original sin, Catholics believe, is baptism. So in the Catholic faith, all who are born with original sin that must be cleansed by the sacrament of baptism. You follow? Organized Catholicism operates on the basis that humans, if given free will sin. They did it at the beginning with Adam and Eve, and they are prone to do so. Free will leads to human sin and self-destruction. How do you curb that? Well, with all the rules in a Catholic society about what you can and cannot do, which are enforced by the state. All right? And this is why you have the unity of church and state in the Catholic countries at the time. But Locke comes forward and says, this idea that humans, if given free will destroy themselves through sin is false. And here's the proof. In the past 150 years, we've had scientists who have pushed for intellectual freedom, and they haven't led to chaos. They've led to accuracy in our science. What if we allow that to happen elsewhere? Just free thinking. And the good ideas remain, and the bad ideas we throw out because no one believes in them. So he posited, I don't think people were born with original sin, because we've proven that. When people have freedom of thought, they don't commit sin. They actually try to improve the world. He posited, people aren't born with original sin. People are born with a blank slate. They're not born good, they're not born evil, they're born ignorant. It is society that makes them good, bad, smart, not. Everybody is open to being made into, matured into, cultured into a good citizen. They're not inherently bad. Now, yes, some people are just inherently bad, but the majority are not. Okay? Well, if people are not born inherently sinful and do not need the guidance of organized religion, well, all of a sudden, you don't really need church and state so closely allied. Because people make the choice to join this faith or not, or join that faith or not. Now remember, none of these guys are atheists. They all believe in God. They're just arguing, church has a specific role in my life, and it's got nothing to do with the relation of the sun to the earth. Okay? Then he wrote the letter concerning toleration. Well, he wrote this the year before, but his thinking went into all these works at the same time, which is, humans are free to make their own choices because they're not inherently sinful. They're rational human beings. If given intellectual freedom, they'll make the right choices. Some of them will make stupid choices, but then they'll learn from their mistakes. And that was the whole idea behind the separation of church and state. Allow people to voluntarily choose what faith they want, because it doesn't make any sense to force people to follow a faith. It just leads to civil war. Now, finally, is there a finally? No, this is the final. From this basis, Locke makes a much more revolutionary idea about the nature of the individual to the state. He wasn't just saying you can choose your own church. He was saying you can choose your own government. And if you don't like it, you can get rid of it, which is vastly against the notion of absolutism that says you're stuck with the king you got, because if you disobey with the king, you're going to be punished by God. This is vastly different. Now, to all the people that say, remember Bossuet said, if you don't obey the king, chaos and anarchy is the result. Locke is saying, no, the people are rational. They know what they want. They know what works. Give them the freedom to experiment and determine what they want, and they'll end up with a working system of government. And that's what I'm going to pick up with at the beginning of next class. So, I'm done early. Bring up your homework. Drop it here, please. I will see you next class. And we don't have any volunteers for next class, so that's nice. If you didn't get your homework or you came in late, let me know. And then I'll talk to Ricardo and... What's your name?
Jency.
What's that? Jency? Jency. I'll talk to you in a moment. Just let me settle up here.
Sure. Okay, I can choose on my screen. Okay, right there.
You too. Take care.